Welcome to the realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy listening. Jonathan Bischoff, a research officer specializing in extraterrestrial life, was about to embark on his first long mission. The excitement was nearly overwhelming, but his colleagues had given him plenty of advice to help keep his enthusiasm in check. This wasn't just a job for Jonathan, it was his childhood dream coming to life. For years, he had prepared for a chance to explore uncharted territories, and now he was about to put his training to the test. His assignment was to travel to the desert section of Orcs space colony, spend only a few hours conducting research, and then return with a detailed report for his superiors. The days leading up to the journey were filled with preparations. Jonathan double-checked his equipment, ensuring his protective suit, designed for the harsh conditions of space, was ready. He knew that the trust of his colleagues rested on his ability to perform, and he silently prayed to not let them down. Despite his careful planning, Jonathan was acutely aware of his inexperience. He constantly reminded himself to avoid unnecessary risks and had resolved to steer clear of any interactions with alien life forms, should he encounter any. However, Jonathan's soft heart made him incapable of turning his back on anyone or anything in need. After a long journey, his spacecraft finally landed in the desert of Orcs space colony. The scene that greeted him was vastly different from what he had imagined. Instead of the danger and unpredictability he had anticipated, the barren landscape seemed almost tranquil. Jonathan immediately began documenting his observations. The texture of the sand, the peculiar plants sprouting sporadically, and the sparse vegetation. For a while his nerves eased, and he allowed himself to relax. The quietness of the desert lulled him into a sense of security. Feeling the effects of exhaustion from his journey, Jonathan decided to sit down and rest for a moment. As he gazed into the distance, a faint purple light caught his attention. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the light or his tired eyes playing tricks on him, but as the glow grew brighter, unease crept into his mind. His earlier apprehensions resurfaced, and he considered retreating to his spacecraft. Yet the words of his colleagues echoed in his mind. Never abandon your mission. Summoning his courage, Jonathan decided to investigate. The glowing light seemed to pulse as he approached, leading him to a peculiar sight, a humanoid figure lying motionless on the sand. The figure was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin was a soft lavender hue, and her form exuded an otherworldly elegance. She was stunning yet utterly alien. Jonathan's heart pounded as he whispered, You're an alien. I found you." But his excitement quickly turned to concern when he realized she wasn't moving. Kneeling beside her, he gently checked for signs of life. Her body lacked any of the familiar indicators of a human heartbeat. Near her left hand, Jonathan noticed the source of the purple light, a small, black material that seemed to emit a steady glow when her hand rested upon it. Intrigued, he carefully lifted her hand, and the light vanished instantly. Beneath it was a smooth, opaque object that he couldn't identify. He placed her hand back on the object, and the light returned. Fascinated and puzzled, Jonathan struggled to piece together the connection between the glowing material and her lifeless state. Suddenly, her fingers twitched, causing Jonathan to leap backward in shock. He watched as her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, but her gaze soon settled on him. Her voice, soft and melodic, broke the silence. "It's been so long since I've seen a human." Jonathan was momentarily at a loss for words, but then his curiosity took over. "What happened to you?" he asked. "Why were you motionless? Are you hurt?" Slowly, she began to explain. She was a traveler from a distant world, one whose species absorbed energy directly from starlight to sustain themselves. However, something had gone wrong here. The atmosphere of this place had disrupted her ability to regenerate, leaving her immobilized. Jonathan listened intently, his scientific mind racing to understand her plight. She introduced herself as Lisa, and she revealed that the purple light was an extension of her energy, a manifestation of her life force. The object beneath her hand amplified this energy, but it wasn't enough to fully restore her. Jonathan, deeply moved by her vulnerability, vowed to help her. The process of moving Lisa proved to be grueling. Her body was heavier than it appeared, and Jonathan was cautious not to harm her in his attempts to lift her. It took hours of effort, but finally she managed to stand, albeit unsteadily. Her legs trembled with each step, and she clung to Jonathan for support as they slowly made their way back to his spacecraft. Once inside, Jonathan carefully secured her in the passenger seat and began the journey back to his base. The ride was silent, but not uncomfortable. Lisa seemed to regain some strength during the trip, though she remained visibly weak. When they arrived, Jonathan's colleagues were stunned by the sight of her. Scientists quickly took over, whisking Lisa away to an observation facility despite Jonathan's protests. He could only hope they would treat her with respect and care. Days turned into weeks, and Jonathan received no updates on Lisa's condition. He spent his free time wandering near the observation center, hoping for a glimpse of her. Then, one morning as he sat outside, lost in thought, he saw her walking toward him. Lisa looked radiant, her strength fully restored. Without a word, she approached him, her expression a mix of gratitude and affection. Jonathan stood, his heart racing. From his pocket, he pulled out a small box and dropped to one knee. Inside the box was a simple yet elegant silver ring. It glinted in the sunlight, reflecting the hope and nervous energy in Jonathan's eyes. "Lisa," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to spill over, "I know we come from different worlds. I know our lives, our very beings, are unlike anything either of us could have imagined. But what I do know is this. I want to spend the rest of my life learning about your world and sharing mine with you. Will you stay with me?" Lisa gazed at him, her lavender skin glowing softly under the sun's warmth. Her luminous eyes, filled with curiosity and emotion, flicked between Jonathan and the ring. She hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right response, then reached out and touched the ring gently with her slender fingers. Her lips curved into a soft, warm smile. "Yes," she said, her voice like a melody carried on the breeze. "Yes, Jonathan, I will stay with you." Jonathan exhaled deeply, the tension in his shoulders melting away as relief and joy washed over him. He slid the ring onto her finger, noting how perfectly it seemed to fit, as if it had been made for her all along. Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight embrace, and for the first time he felt the full warmth of her presence, both literal and figurative. Her energy seemed to pulse gently against him, a soothing rhythm that made him feel more alive than he ever had. As their relationship deepened over the following weeks, Lisa began to adapt to life among humans. Jonathan introduced her to the small, quiet routines of Earth-like living at the colony. The concept of meals, conversations over coffee, and the simple pleasure of watching the stars at night. At first, Lisa was overwhelmed by the density of human interactions. Her species was accustomed to solitude, with communication occurring through subtle energy exchanges rather than words. But Jonathan's patience and genuine curiosity about her world helped bridge the gap between them. One evening, as they sat together outside the observation dome, Jonathan pointed to the stars. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "You're home." Lisa tilted her head, her glowing eyes reflecting the constellations above. "I do," she admitted, her voice tinged with a quiet melancholy. "But I think I found something here that I didn't have before. My world was beautiful, but it was silent, isolated. Here, with you, I feel connected. That is something I didn't know I was missing." Jonathan reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over the ring on her finger. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. "Not as long as I'm here." Lisa, in turn, began to share pieces of her culture and abilities with Jonathan. One day, she demonstrated how her species could manipulate light and energy to create visual displays. With a graceful movement of her hands, she conjured a shimmering, ethereal projection of her homeworld. Vast landscapes bathed in iridescent hues, skies that shifted colors with the passing of time, and crystalline structures that seemed to hum with life. Jonathan watched in awe, his scientific mind grappling with the sheer beauty and complexity of what she was showing him. "It's incredible," he whispered. "It's like nothing I've ever seen. Thank you for sharing this with me." Lisa smiled, a faint blush spreading across her cheeks, reaction she had recently learned to recognize in herself as affection. It's only a fragment of what I can show you. There is so much more, but I think I'd rather discover what your world has to offer first. Their life together wasn't without challenges. The scientific community at the colony remained intensely curious about Lisa, and their constant questions and tests often left her feeling like an exhibit rather than an individual. Jonathan became her fiercest advocate, standing firm against anyone who treated her as a mere specimen. Over time, his colleagues began to respect her boundaries, and Lisa, in turn, grew more comfortable sharing her knowledge. One particular day, a heated debate arose among the scientists about whether Lisa's energy could be harnessed as a renewable resource. Jonathan was quick to intervene. "She's not a power source," he said firmly. "She's a sentient being with her own will and rights. If we want to learn from her, it has to be on her terms." Lisa watched the exchange quietly, her glowing eyes full of gratitude. Later that evening, as they sat together in their quarters, she placed a hand over his. "You defend me as if you've known me your entire life," she said softly. "Thank you, Jonathan. You make this world feel like home." Jonathan smiled, his heart swelling at her words. "You are home to me, Lisa." Months passed, and their bond only grew stronger. Jonathan proposed a new project, building a small home at the edge of the colony, away from the constant bustle of the research facilities. It was a modest dwelling, but it became a sanctuary where they could simply be themselves, Jonathan, the curious human, and Lisa, the radiant traveler from the stars. On the night they moved in, they stood together on the porch, looking up at the endless expanse of stars. Lisa leaned against Jonathan, her lavender skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Do you ever think about the vastness of it all?" she asked. "How unlikely it is that we found each other." Jonathan wrapped an arm around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. "Every day," he said, "and I thank the stars for it." As they stood there, the world around them seemed to fade away. In the vastness of the universe, they had found something rare and extraordinary, each other. And in that quiet moment, beneath the same stars that had brought them together, they both knew they had found their true home, not in a place, but in each other.